Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Houston, Odysseus has found his new home.
After a few tense moments in mission control, with flight controllers scrambling to solve a last-minute problem with the navigation system.
I know this was a nail-biter, but we are on the surface, and we are transmitting, and welcome to the moon.
NASA announces what it calls another giant step forward for mankind.
Today, for the first time in more than a half century, the U.S. has returned to the moon. Today, for the first time in the history of humanity, a commercial company, an American company, launched and led the voyage up there.
And liftoff.
The unmanned Nova-C lunar lander, the Odysseus, launched from the Kennedy Space Center 7 days ago, taking these photos along the way.
Everything that we learn from being able to succeed there brings back benefits to Earth.
On board are Canadian cameras, Eagle Cam, designed to deploy right before landing to take the first ever selfie of a lander touching down, and another that could capture the first images of the Milky Way from the lunar surface.
And it'll be the first for the scientists, for the engineers, but also for the public to see how it is to land on the surface of the moon.
On touchdown, the lander was transmitting, but its status wasn't immediately clear. Other countries have successfully landed unmanned spacecraft. A Japanese one landed earlier this year, but ran out of power shortly after. Experts say all attempts are building toward the ultimate mission of sending people back to the moon.
Jeremy Hansen.
The Artemis II mission, in which Jeremy Hansen will make history as the first Canadian to travel to the moon.
We've learned a lot from the Apollo missions, but we've now got even more questions driving us to go back.
Other companies are also planning to send spacecraft to the moon, but right now, all eyes are on the Odysseus to see what it can achieve. Kayla.
Well, hi there, world. Episode 72, Astrophysics.
Yes,
My name's
yes.
Jay Katz. You're on Untold Radio. This is Down South Anomalies, and today we're extremely privileged. Let me give you the title. Odysseus, 52 years later and still tilting at the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just before we introduce our profound guest, I have to say we're broadcasting on stolen land.
Yep.
The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I want to pay my respects and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging.
Now, tell us about Jarrah.
Jarrah, are you ready? This is one of the greatest CVs we've ever read. In our midst, and I'm so astounded that this gentleman actually lives in Sydney, Australia with us.
Funny that.
Is that we've been following his work for years on
Absolutely.
YouTube, Moonfaker.
Yep.
This man is the James Bond I've always been after. He's actually, I respect him
You mean
more than
Moonraker?
James
Yeah,
Bond.
yeah, yeah.
I
Go
do.
ahead. Yeah.
Moonfaker, darling.
Yeah.
All right. Jarrah White is an Australian filmmaker,
Mhm.
astrophysicist. Get that in your heads,
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Geologist. He has his certificate 3 and 4 qualifications with distinctions in screen and media at the Sydney Institute of TAFE in Australia, and a BSc with a major in geology and a minor in astrophysics, completed in November 2017 and July 2019, respectively. Now, do you know he has produced over 100 videos regarding the Apollo moon landing conspiracy theories, most notably the Moonfaker series. He has also written many articles for Oscillus Online and keeps the book NASA Mooned America by the extraordinary Ralph Renee in print. Do not buy it from Amazon. Buy it from Jarrah. Amazon need to be taken to court, but that's a whole other story.
Taken to task, that's for sure. Yep.
And you know, he's acquired the copyright since the author's passing, and he was totally respected by William Casing and Ralph Renee.
Yep.
He has been interviewed for many Australian and international magazines, newspapers, and radio shows to discuss views. Over the course of his research, he has attended various space-related press conferences and interviews or otherwise questioned many noteworthy people, including Buzz Aldrin.
Okay.
He wasn't hit by Buzz Aldrin. That was someone else. Buzz was fine with him. Wendy Casing, daughter of Bill Casing, Ralph Renee, and many others. Jarrah has also produced YouTube documentaries chronicling SpaceX's progress in the Starship program, as well as videos debunking false claims that the Earth is flat and Challenger crew still being alive. Thank heavens for that, because where in the hell did that garbage come from? White has also acted part-time, appearing in Australian comedic television productions like Fat Pizza, and is aspiring. He doesn't aspire, he is an alternate history fiction author. His first novel, Trojan Smirch, is that right? Is that how I pronounce that? Smirch?
Yes, Smirch, yes.
Beautiful. Has been accepted for publication by Aurora House and will be released later this year. We'll look at that book at the end of this show.
Okay.
Now, as a young man, White dreamed of becoming an astronaut and going to Mars. Who didn't? We were so conditioned with that space race. It was out of control.
Absolutely.
Now he considers himself a vocal, scientific, underlined 100 times minority, being one of the few academics who doubts the Apollo moon missions. He believes that private space exploration is the way into the future. He is fascinated by the successes and failures of this industry in recent years, and through his YouTube videos has advocated his own theories on how to use private space technology to overcome radiation hazards on flights to the moon and Mars. And we've got his email. We'll put that in the link.
That's up in the notes.
We'll put a
all
link,
that is going to be in the notes.
and we'll put a link there to Moonfaker and a link to wherever that book's going to be able to be purchased. Jarrah, now we'll stop that breathing. That scared the hell out of me. I thought we're in the midst of the California quake there. Yeah. Be careful with that. Jarrah is a controversial figure, and I think for all the wrong reasons. Jarrah has done what few researchers do, and that is he's put his money where his mouth is, and he's gone and got extraordinary scientific qualifications.
Sure.
Something that's going to leave us completely naive as the Jane and Joe Doe of just, anomalous research. We're destroyed here.
Yeah, but I still have some critical faculties, and I have some
common sense.
And I have some common sense that when I hear something that doesn't quite add up, then I'm going to question it. And I don't have to be, learned in whatever field it is. If something doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense.
And Jarrah, my wife, believe it or not, 33 years we've been together. We met as therapists. She is a true lesbian. She comes from Lesbos.
Yeah.
I'm not talking sexually. I'm talking about her heritage. And believe me, the island of Lesbos is so caustic.
Yeah.
Those people, you can't even mention the moon landing. They go so angry.
Well, here's the thing. When I was growing up in my house as a young child, my parents did not believe that the moon, that we landed on the moon. They didn't. There was like, no way. This is American propaganda. That's all I ever heard from it. This is American propaganda. This is, this is BS, and they're just wanting it to puff themselves up and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, of course, we'd go to school. I watched the landing on the moon in 1969 in the school assembly hall, on a small TV set up on the stage, and 500 kids, maybe even more, sitting, in the audience there, trying to watch this landing. Anyway, and of course I totally believed it because it's like, well, it was on television and everybody was talking about it and blah, blah, blah. But then as I got old, and I thought my parents, they're simple village folk. They don't know what they're talking about. They're uneducated. And, but
nice people, though.
Nice people, though. But eventually, when I started looking into, the alternate voice, because you can't, if there are voices out there in the wilderness saying things, you've got to listen to them, and you can either choose to say, oh, yeah, look, that makes some sort of sense, or no, I'm not going to have a bar
There's
of that.
so much corruption in the world. Well, how can you trust authority all the
Well,
time?
you can't trust. Look, you can't just, just give people, your trust over to them just because they're in authority. That doesn't
And they've
mean
got
anything.
power and money.
That doesn't mean
But
anything.
you know what would be nice, Asper?
What?
Is if you stop that rant and we actually
I let
heard
Jarrah
from
talk.
Jarrah.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
he's
I'm
our
just
guest, for God's sake.
Anyway,
Jarrah,
okay.
it is a privilege to have you here, and I thank you for your valuable time. Odysseus, they're calling it the second great day. Well, I'm actually saying that. I'm using Nixon's terms, since creation. And we were led to believe within the first 24 hours that landing was successful. And now we know something different. So maybe give us a little bit of background on what you think has happened to this, what supposedly America is heralding the first moon landing since Apollo 17.
The first American landing since Apollo 17. But
American,
the thing about I think they need to keep their expectations in check and their celebrations in an order, because back in the 60s, the whole idea was to, if the spacecraft lands, right, and operates functionally, there's nothing gone wrong there, that would be considered a success. If there was something went terribly wrong, if there was a major malfunction of sorts, then they would be announced as such. But now it just seems, let's just get it to the moon. Whether it lands there in one piece or not seems to be an afterthought. And so, what actually happened with the Odysseus, they call it Oddy as well for short. The spacecraft, right, they had a laser altimeter to try and help it touch down. What the altimeter does is it fires a laser at the moon, measures the time it takes for the laser to return back to the spacecraft. So it's sort of like a ground proximity radar, only it's using lasers. So they use that to try to pinpoint where it's supposed to find a decent space to land. And as soon as it's found a nice place, okay, hover over here, and then we'll just go straight down, right? That was the plan. The idea was to go down vertically like an elevator at about 3 kilometers per hour, but the laser altimeter failed, right? So they had to do some quick rerouting of the algorithm on the spacecraft to try to use the other instruments to try to use it to try to navigate during the descent. But as is typical of code, one simple error and the whole program screws up. They had made one error in the calculations, and so it didn't program itself properly, and it came down too. Not only did it come down too fast, it also had lateral movement. It wasn't supposed to have lateral movement coming down. It was coming down at 10 kilometers per hour and moving sideways at about 3 kilometers per hour, and so it also landed about 1.5 kilometers off course. Okay, from the intended target zone, and where it ended up touching down was sloped, and so first of all, it's coming down sideways. It snagged its leg on a rock or a crater or something, and as I said, it came down on a slope, so it ended up tipping over, and that's why there was having so much issues trying to get the signals to the back to the ground, back to Earth, because it was in an awkward position to transmit.
Absolutely awkward position and transmit. I was actually attending a funeral that day, but I woke up in the morning in the glory now of not sitting with 500 children at Artarmon Public School and watching a 29-inch monitor meters away and going, is this happening? There I am on the internet. And I think it was Astra Bremen or something, which is a group of young trainee flight controllers, astrophysicists, students that all get together. They're actually working in tandem with NASA to explain the landing. And I'm looking at imagery on my screen on my video. It was black and white, but it looked really good. It was high def. But I thought, this is a simulation and no one's telling us it's a simulation. Now, that might be a moot point, but I actually then got in the chat and I said, are we watching a simulation? And they said, yes. And I said, isn't there a multiple number of cameras on board this lander, and shouldn't we be able to see at least something? The deployment of these cameras, there was a long extended pause, and then I was told, maybe, just maybe, because this is Intuitive Machines and this is a private company tendering for contracts through this mission, that it might be a good thing for them to have the cameras on just in case something goes wrong. Let me play just one little piece of news. Can you just play that under there? And this is what they said 24 hours later about the data that was coming back.
And new in the last few hours, Houston-based company Intuitive Machines is sharing brand new images of the moon. Its lunar lander, nicknamed Odie, took these pictures after landing on the moon on Friday. Stephanie Whitfield has the latest on this historic mission.
Ignition.
11 days after launching from Earth,
Go IM-1 and the Odysseus lunar lander.
we're seeing the first images of the moon from the lunar lander Odysseus. The spacecraft, nicknamed Odie, touched down Friday. This morning, Intuitive Machines says Odysseus continues to communicate with flight controllers in Nova Control from the lunar surface. The Houston company says these images represent the furthest south any vehicle has been able to land on the moon and establish communication with ground controllers. Experts say the mission.
Now, that is one of the worst lunar photos I've ever seen in my life, and so they haven't gone to a great extent at all. So maybe just tell us about that. And here's an assumption of mine. Did they wait till the stock market had closed on Friday before the head of Intuitive Machines made the public statement? Because their stock was soaring, and then come Monday morning in the US, their stock was soaring in the opposite direction.
Well, I don't really follow the stock in the United States, so I can't really comment on that. But the photograph that they showed of the landing site, that's from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. I have several videos on the. If you see me rubbing up my eyes, it's early and it's the light showing my face and stuff. But anyways, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, they've produced several videos about that. This was NASA's mission to photograph the moon surface down to about half a meter per pixel. And this was hyped as going to be the absolute proof that they sent, man to the moon. But obviously, well, it's a NASA picture, so it's a NASA spacecraft. They would say something like that. And it's obviously the data is, filtered through all these various facilities at NASA. It's received by the White Sands. It's sent over to Goddard, then it's sent to Arizona State University. So this game of pass the parcel gives them the opportunity to, do some alterations to the pictures of the Apollo sites. And in fact, I actually got a recent article on Ollis about this. The Indian space probe, the Chandrayaan-2, revealed that at the Apollo 11 site, there's actually a surveyor spacecraft in the Eagle's place.
Wow.
Yes. And so, but anyways, that's
incredible.
Now about the Odysseus. I always call it the Nova C because that's the actual name of the spacecraft. The Nova C spacecraft has fallen over. And this picture is from, as is typical of all the LRO pictures. It doesn't really show much detail, but obviously it's landed off course and it's fallen over. Now, as for the pictures itself that it carried, as I said, because it landed in an awkward spot, it can't get the antennas in the right way. It can't get the power it needs and everything, because that uses the solar power, and it's going to be very difficult. It's going to pretty much drained of power when it's not in the right position. A similar thing happened recently to the Japanese spacecraft as well. The Japanese spacecraft called SLIM. I forget the acronym off the top of my head, but basically this idea was it has its engines this side, but it's got its legs that side. The idea was to land like that and then tilt on its side. It ended up tumbling down a hill and landing upside down. How it managed to do that's crazy. But the whole fact of the matter is because it landed awkwardly, it too doesn't get enough power, and so they had some issues with that too. And so as for the cameras on the spacecraft itself, on the Nova C spacecraft, or IM-1 as they also call it, it's the cameras the picture they was supposed to deploy a little CubeSat called the Eagle Cam during the descent. Right, and the idea was it would deploy this camera, and it would just actually record, pictures of the vehicle as during its descent, because we're used to seeing, onboard cameras, looking down at the legs and descending. Right, the idea here was that we'd have a camera outside, an external camera, essentially showing it touch down, but whether the thing failed to deploy or it failed to transmit is anyone's guess at this point. And the pictures that we do have are from the wide-angle lens. Now, I've been a bit distressed by some of the things people have been saying about the use of fisheye lenses. Typically whenever there's a fisheye lens of space, the flat earthers, of course, are going to jump in and say, "Oh, they're using fisheye lenses. It's to prove curvature of the Earth." Blah, blah. silly nonsense and stuff. There is a practical reason to using a fisheye lens. Like with a normal wide angle lens, okay, you're just seeing directly ahead of you and stuff. Whereas with a fisheye, you can see at the sides as well. So the idea is
you're getting a lot more data.
You're getting ocular.
Every kilogram of mass that you send into space costs money, and so we want to get as much data on as little money as possible. And so, using fisheye lenses is a surefire way to get a good wide view of the surrounds. You can also process the image after the fact, to unstretch the distorting effects, all those sort of things. But those are the only pictures we've been able to get back from the spacecraft, and we've also got pictures from the actual feed. We can actually see. I think I sent you one of the pictures last night where the
lander's
feed from
feet.
the actual camera on the side showing the leg had snapped in at least 2 places.
Which one? Second, yeah.
Yes, that's
that
the
one. All right, yeah.
And that's before it's touched down, is it, Joe?
That's actually when it snagged on the side. As I said, it was coming down too fast and coming down with lateral movement and stuff. So it skidded it across the lunar surface, and somehow it's managed to break its leg literally. And so it's either snagged it on a rock or it snagged it in a crater. One or another, it broke and it tipped over.
Which one?
Go to the next one, the one up the top.
Oh, that one there, the lander. Mm-hmm.
Which is when they were explaining it.
Yeah, exactly. This is an artist illustration demonstrating how it was supposed to land. It was supposed to land upright on very level terrain, but as I said, it landed off course. It landed on slope terrain. It just skidded across the surface and tipped over, as he shows in the. This is from the press conference. You can see the little model he has there. It showed how it's tipped over on its side as a result of the awkward landing.
Looks like those little toys I used to get out of the Weet-Bix packet, that had a weight and then walk across the table there. Is there an argument there for a vertical or horizontal landing? Are we going back to Fraudemont? Are we going to Guy Debord and the Situationists here? Are we looking at the power of the spectacle? I'm surprised at how much that lander, 52 years later, sort of emulates the look of the original LEM in many ways. Would it have been better that you had something that was horizontally set than vertically upright? Would that make for an easier landing? I'm not too sure.
Well, it'd be harder for it to tip, wouldn't it?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, that's been proposed for various unfulfilled missions to the moon. I believe the I forget what it was called right now. The Exploration Space Initiative, I think it was. They had plans for vertical landers, which would land. Horizontal landers, which would land like that. Okay, like here's one end, here's the other end. It would come straight down like that. That was proposed for the for Bush Senior's proposal for return missions to moon. Obviously, nothing ever came about of that. And one of the reasons as well why this this spacecraft is built the way it is, in many ways, it's considered a version of Elon Musk's Starship in miniature, because it's obviously very tall and everything, and it's also running on the same fuels. A lot of people don't really talk about this, but it's an issue that really needs to be addressed. Is that Starship, which they're proposing to land on the moon, for the Artemis 3 mission, is another pipe dream. But the idea is that it will be using methane and liquid oxygen. You see, normally when you have spacecrafts going to the moon, they use hypergolics, which are basically chemicals which you put them together. They react similar to the way lemon and baking soda does. They put them together and they ignite spontaneously, right? We have liquid oxygen and in this case they're using liquid methane. It doesn't really matter which one it is. They both have the same shortcomings. You see, oxygen can only be stored in liquid form in sub-zero temperatures. Something like -200 Celsius. I forget the exact number off the top of my head. You can look that up. And on the launch pad, you can see how they have got all that. Or when the rocket takes off, you can see pieces breaking off it. That's actually ice. You see, they use all the cryogenic tank. They use all these air conditioning units to keep the thing in liquid form, because after a few minutes, you see the oxygen will turn back into a gas and has to be vented off, and they call that boil off. The same thing happens with hydrogen and methane. In case of hydrogen, it's even worse because hydrogen it's very, very small. It's essentially so it has a better chance of escaping through microscopic holes in the tank. So that tank has to be more strongly welded. If you have a lightly shielded tank, then the boil off you can expect is in the ballpark numbers of about 0.5 to 1% per day. So if it takes about 4 days to get to the moon, by the end of that 4-day trip, you've lost about 2% of your propellant to space. And so the idea is that they wanted to test this spacecraft to see if it would work. Be from a field perspective, it seems to have done its job. Apart from obviously the bad landing, which was due to another set of reasons altogether. But
so literally using methane and oxygen there. I mean, this may sound absurd, but we're farting our way to the moon now, are we? I mean, really, how insane is that? But anyhow, what is happening here, Jarrah? 52 years later, we should have perfected this thing. If we've been there successfully over 6 missions, what is going on?
Well, the way I see it is that they've only the U.S. governments, the U.S. president's candidates, they're all more interested in a promise of a return to the moon, not the actual delivering on it. You know, it's good for votes, I reckon. You know, George Bush Sr., he promised to put men on the moon by the 21st century, at the beginning of the 21st century. I have a documentary as well. I was watching a documentary the other day from around 1999. They reckon they would have men on the moon by 2020. We couldn't even leave our house because of COVID in 2020. And, Clinton, he cancelled that proposal. Then Bush Jr. comes along. He proposes, okay, we're going to have men on the moon, men to Mars and beyond. Obviously, trying to get reelected after the whole war in Iraq sort of thing, shat on his opinion polls. And so Obama comes along, no, it's too expensive. We can't treat American dollars like they're monopoly money. Then he gets called out on canceling this thing after they've had one launch of the Ares rocket, and then he changes his mind. Okay, we're going to skip the moon, head off to Mars. We've been to the moon before. Mars has been there. There's a lot more space to explore. Basically, those words he said. I would have thought going to Mars would have been much more expensive than going to the moon. That's another thing as well. They were proposing when I got a newspaper from around the time Apollo 11 was supposed to have landed, and they were saying that we'd have men on Mars by 1982.
They were training astronauts. I mean, Brian O'Leary wrote that book, The Unmaking of an American Astronaut, in 1970. I think he was part of a Mars mission that was being trained at that time, evidently.
Yeah, so in those days, the idea was they had what was called the flyby. There was called a Venus flyby, but it has Mars applications as well. The idea was essentially a wet workshop version of Skylab. It's I say wet workshop and there's dry workshops. Is the idea with wet workshop is you've got the spent rocket stage. Once it's run out of propellant, you basically convert that into a living quarters. Okay, and you just live in there for the remainder of the trip. With a dry workshop, you assemble the base on the ground first of all, then you just launch it into space straight up as is. The Skylab as we know it was a dry workshop. The idea for the flyby missions was to use a wet shop variant of Skylab. We send the spacecraft out towards Mars or Venus, and then they just convert the spent rocket stage into a living quarters. Obviously, the planners of such a mission didn't consider the very basic necessities like radiation shielding. Like if you're going to be traveling out to Venus or out to Mars, this is just a flyby night, although there was some proposals for dropping a sample return missions or even a manned sample return mission, just a tiny little capsule, quickly bounce off and then get back onto the spacecraft before we leave Mars orbit or Mars flyby rather. That's how cavalier some of these proposals were. But obviously,
cavalier. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. Cavalier is just no. I mean, what is going on? Time is running out for them because these statements now are becoming like it's 2 years away from us landing men on the moon. Do you think it is possible for this to occur?
I don't think it's possible with what they're proposing to do. Like the Starship, for example, that they're counting on for the Artemis 3 mission, even notwithstanding the fact that it doesn't have enough radiation shielding, what Musk is proposing is that we would have the Starship launch the mission into Earth orbit, launch the Starship spacecraft into Earth orbit, then they would send up 10 or 20 tanker missions to refuel the tanks, send it out towards the moon. The idea is the astronauts would rendezvous with that in lunar orbit, dock with that, and then use that to go down to the lunar surface. Well, here's the thing: they can only launch about five Starships from the Boca Chica launch site per year. Okay. Now, if you're going to need 20 tanker missions, just to be conservative, if you even need 10 of these refueling missions to to fill up the tanks and then send it out to the moon. Okay, that's looking at 2 years away at the very least. And still keep in mind they've got to do a unmanned dress rehearsal of this thing before they can even think about putting people on there. And so this idea is just going to go further and further into the future until that gets inevitably cancelled altogether. That seems to be their modus operandi. Announce, delay, 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 cancel. Announce, delay, 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 cancel. Announce, delay, 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 cancel ad nauseum. That's pretty much what it's come down to in the long run.
I love the way you did that.
Well, that's what's been happening. I mean, I've been keeping up with, all this stuff, and it just keeps getting further and further away every time. And especially when you have a mission like this where they're just landing a probe on there and they can't even get that right. You kind of go, what's going on here? Why was the technology back in 1969 able to do that? And here we are, so far down the track now with all these amazing AI machines and all this technology that we have and blah, blah, blah. And we can't even land, a probe on the moon. It just, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. It seems to me like, whatever technology we had with the Apollo, the Saturn V, whatever it was, that sent men to the moon and was able to bring them home, they kind of like scrapped it. Went, we're not going to use that anymore.
I was just going to say, Don Pettit actually went on the record to say that they destroyed that technology, at the end of the Apollo program.
Why would they do that? Why would they destroy it? Why don't you just keep it for posterity's sake? Why don't you keep it and build on that? Improve on that.
When did we go to LA? When was that?
2010.
We went to Edwards Air Force Base, right? We had one of those little private, there was about 30 people. We had a tour. My brother-in-law is a diplomat, so he got us in there. And you know what? They took us around the back of a hangar at that facility, and they showed us
a LEM
that they said was the closest approximation to the real LEM. They had to go and recover it from a scrap metal yard. It was 3 weeks away from destruction.
Yeah.
Why would you put the greatest craft that humanity has ever constructed up in the scrap metal yard? What is going on there?
Usually the argument to that is, we need to, focus our energies on new resources like the space shuttle or this or that. But obviously they don't really do anything with even notwithstanding. Okay, let's take the Saturn V out of it, right? There's been various other rockets that have been developed over the years that theoretically could have, replicated what was done on Apollo, but they never chose to do it. The Soviets, they had the Zonda mission. In fact, the Zonda actually is a proof of concept as to how you would actually fake a mission to the moon such that the radio operators would be fooled. What they did was they had a Soyuz spacecraft. They stripped it down a bit. They took off the orbital module, so they just had the re-entry module and the service module with the solar panels. And so they would send that atop a Proton rocket, which was the heavy lift rocket that they had. They had two rockets. They had the R7 and they got the Proton. They had an even bigger heavy lift rocket called the N1, which didn't work out. I'll get back to that in a second. But here's the thing. The N1 didn't work, but the Proton had made several flights around the moon and back. And so they never crewed it, right? Today, they still have that technology today. They're still using the Proton. They're using the Soyuz. Obviously they have to thicken the heat shield a little bit to survive the re-entry speeds. But if you got it, why not you just use it? And then during the shuttle program, this was around the time when Bush Senior proposed missions to the moon. They had what was called the early lunar axis, which was to have a space shuttle launch basically an Apollo-style command module, not the LEM, but the command module, the mothership, attached to its own sort of landing legs. A separate rocket like an Ariane 5 or a Titan rocket would launch a Centaur. Centaur is a heavy lift rocket stage, or upper stage rather, that they use to send probes out to the planets, like they had planned to use it for Galileo and some of the other space probes. But anyways, the idea is they would launch a Centaur rocket atop an Ariane or a Titan rocket. The shuttle would deploy the manned craft. They would dock together, send it out to the moon. In fact, just to save on fuel costs, the idea was it wouldn't enter lunar orbit. It would literally be sent directly to a landing phase. So like, here's the moon coming into space. Here's the rocket. Boom. So it's literally moon or bust in that regard, because like they're literally sending it like they're like a meteorite. And that was an actual proposal. That was the proposal that they were planning on. It was called Early Lunar Axis. Didn't come about. Then they had plans for using what was called the Shuttle C, or its modern equivalent, rather. I forget what it's called right now. But basically, instead of the shuttle, you have this gigantic compartment module with your little engines on the bottom. You would put your lunar module in there. You would put the mothership in another one. You know, have those sent to the moon, have them dock, and do that. There's all these proposals that have been passing around there. If you have the technology, why don't you use it? And I think the reason why they never use it is because, well, number one, as I said, the promise of returning to the moon is good for getting re-elected or getting elected, and secondly, is they don't have the technology to actually shield the astronauts from the radiation that they would encounter. Sending a probe to the moon is one thing. That's no problem about it. They sent probes to the moon. They've sent probes around the moon and back. They've got sample return missions. The Chinese and the Russians have both done that. The hard part is getting astronauts past the radiation of the Van Allen radiation belts. And once you're beyond that, you've got issues of solar flares. One issue that's actually been proposed, this is actually under study right now, is let me just get some visual aid here. Okay, the Earth, right? The Earth has a magnetic field which traps the radiation of the Van Allen belts in there, right? But the solar wind actually blows the. Imagine this is the magnetic field. The Earth is about here. The solar wind actually blows the magnetic field all the way back past beyond the orbit of the moon. During the full moon, the moon will actually transfer through the tail. They call it the magnetotail. Right? The moon will actually transfer through the magnetotail and receives the same level of protection that the Earth receives against solar flares and the like. And one proposal that's being considered is to actually send the astronauts down that tail, time the mission so it coincides with the full moon. You still got to worry about the Van Allen radiation belts, obviously, but the idea is to send it down the magnetotail, do your activities on the lunar surface, get off there before it exits the tail, come back down the tail, and basically return to Earth. Why wasn't that considered for Apollo? That's a the Apollo missions didn't coincide with the full moon. In fact, they specifically timed the missions to coincide with the lunar mornings, to minimize to minimize the temperatures there, and so they didn't have the opportunity of using magnetotail, right? Why would you even consider that if the Apollo missions were real? It's a fluke of logic, really.
Fascinating and so complex. Let's go to another little piece here. And when intuitive machines, and I asked our man in the chat room, so how intuitive are these machines? And he said to me, oh no, that's just the brand name.
The first U.S. mission to the moon in more than 50 years went sideways the other week. Literally, the Nova C lunar lander, nicknamed Odysseus, successfully soft landed on the moon, but fell over. However, scientists were able to detect a faint signal from the spacecraft shortly after landing. It was even able to send back photos and data. And for more, we're joined by Jack Fisher. He is Vice President of Production and Operations at Intuitive Machines. He also served as Mission Director for IM-1 in Mission Control.
Now, Jack's not very happy with that introduction there. Let me give you another one. And I think this speaks the truth, like you and I. I think our television anchor here, she's had about enough of the double speak.
The Eagle has fallen, and so has the rest of the lunar lander. The CEO of Intuitive Machines made the surprise announcement tonight, just 24 hours after landing on the moon. News 6's Troy Campbell is tracking the latest updates now. And Troy, this is so disappointing. How did this happen?
Well, the company says it appears that the lander either tipped on its side during...
I'm not going to run through that whole news report, but right up the end of that news report, she's just had it. She's like spitting the dummy, and she goes, I'm really disappointed and I'm really fed up.
Yeah.
And I need to see some photographic evidence because this is getting ludicrous. And I think that's the way that we were sort of sold this landing of this probe. The most astounding moment in 52 years for America
Yeah, but
and
we
a private
keep
company.
getting sold this amazing technology that we have today. That in 1969, they went to the moon with the
computing power
of a washing machine. You know what I mean? What did they do? A load when they got there? I don't know, but now
do a load of washing when they got there.
Yeah, is that what they did? But now
it's like it was more computing power than the spacecraft.
I know that. I know. That's what I mean. And
it's still hard to navigate your way out of Darrenburg.
And we still can't land, a probe properly. You know, how many times in these last few months have they sent, and things keep falling over?
If we are to look at this as being fraudulent, which is so astounding because you've got hundreds of thousands of people, and but I mean, Hitler and Goebbels actually said the bigger the lie, the easier it is to pull it over. And in a way, that's totally understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the films, Anyway, let's not go into them. But this is just... Anyway, let's just talk about the original Apollo for a little minute. What are the things now, after decades of astounding research and getting that degree, what are the things that really stand out to you? I mean, the photographic evidence and the shadows, that's all debatable stuff. But what sticks out to you that makes you go, there is something really wrong here?
Well, as I said before, I mentioned about the radiation in the Van Allen belts, and I actually managed to get the trajectory that's been attributed to the Apollo 11, and I cross-referenced those coordinates with the radiation, the industry standard model of the Van Allen belt. It's called the AP8. Okay, this P means the protons. Okay, so I put the coordinates, plugged in the values. Here's the amount of radiation that the astronauts would have received. I did the calculations. I had to do the correction factors as well, because the industry standard model, the AP8, has a tendency to underestimate, just how much radiation is in there, because like subsequent missions that went into the belts and, unmanned missions, of course, they detect much more radiation than what was expected of these models, because they just used averages of all these different satellites they sent back in those days. But anyways, I did the calculations and I found that the astronauts, they should have received about 100 rads. And so that's life-threatening. Okay, they should have received 100 rads for the two-way trip. They said they only received about less than one actually. And so, in fact, I actually got this book here. I actually had a debate with a shuttle astronaut a few months back. I asked if he had read this book, right? And this book here, it's written by various scientists at the Marshall Space Flight Center back in the day, back in 1963. And in this book, they state very clearly that to bring the radiation dose down to about 1 Röntgen per hour, that's about 1.3 rem, okay, you would need about a meter of shielding between the astronauts and the radiation that's outside to bring it down. If they're going to be traveling through the radiation belt, specifically towards the heart of the inner zone. It's important to note that the Apollo 14, NASA, they always like to say, the astronauts, they just skimmed the outer edge of the belts. Well, the Apollo 14 has the highest radiation recording, about 1.4, right? And that's always attributed to them, taking a trajectory that's closer to the heart of the belt. Well, hang on, they didn't have a meter of shielding around them, so how did they do it? And so as a geologist, I'll tell you something as well. The moon rocks, they're often cited as evidence that the missions were real, but I came to a very different conclusion looking at all the data. I've actually looked at the rocks myself. It's very interesting and stuff. I've seen them under the microscope and the like. And first of all, the rocks have a similar composition in chemical and mineral composition to that of Earth rocks, of terrestrial basalts, rocks from volcanoes. The chemical composition is the same, the mineralogy is the same, even the isotopic proportions are mostly the same. There's some little variations here and there, but otherwise it's identical. Okay, and when you take a rock sample, right? Let me get back a little bit. When a rock first forms, okay, the only ion that's in the rock is metallic or ferrous, Fer. Okay, if you expose the rock to water and oxygen for a long time, all the iron in there starts to rust. Turns to ferrite. Right. Okay, and so the rocks that they got back from Apollo, they not only contained up to about 6,000 parts per million of water. That's about 0.6% by weight water, right? They also contained rust as a result of it. The Apollo 16 rock samples are particularly notorious about this. In fact, some of them, one of the rock is actually named Rusty Rock because it's copious amounts of rust, not just on the outside, but deep inside it. The thing in there, and NASA, they had no real explanation for this. In fact, they say, well, this is in the actual compendium. Each sample has its own little paperwork that comes with, with all the studies that have been done on it and whatnot. And in this particular sample, they write, it is possible that the moisture in the spacecraft might have penetrated might have contaminated the outer surfaces, but we don't see how it could have penetrated the internal metal grains. It doesn't make any sense. Basically, their words, they're literally dumbfounded on this. And the geologists, they're definitely, looking for ways to try to justify this. The only place on the moon where comparable amounts of water and rust have been found is in the poles. That's, of course, is because there's permanently shadowed craters there, where you can happily get, water from comets accumulating in those regions, right? But everywhere else on the moon, the water would simply be lost into space. And keep in mind, it's a vacuum of that there. It's the temperatures, the surface temperatures are about 100 degrees Celsius. And in a vacuum, the boiling point of water is drastically lower to sub-zero temperatures. And so it's doubtful that any water has survived in the regions where the Apollo astronauts are said to have gone. And in fact, recently there's been sample return missions by the Chinese and their own studies as well. They report very different composition to the Apollo samples. If I was to go to the moon and collect a rock sample, and if I was to send a probe up there to either analyze or bring one back for me and stuff, I would expect to get the same results. It's not
Absolutely.
Like a lot of people like to say, oh, well, maybe the moon has a much wider diversity. Well, the moon is not like the Earth. The reason why we have such diversity of rocks is because we've got an atmosphere, and so there's constant plate tectonics. There's all this changing, recycling of the surface, all the changes to the rocks that are done, all the alterations by rain or weathering processes and the like. And those things, they just don't happen on the moon because the moon is geologically dead. There's no plate tectonics, there's no active volcanoes, anything like that. And there's no atmosphere, so you can't get all these rusting or the rain or weathering, all that sort of stuff. And so it was something else.
And that's very interesting. Didn't one of the, oh, sorry, you had a point there. Go.
Yeah, one of the rocks from Apollo 14 was actually confirmed to be on a shadow of a doubt to have come from the Earth. And the reason what gave this one away is that a section of it, they call it Big Bertha, this rock, a section of it was more felsic in composition than mafic. Mafic refers to the solidification of materials from deep in the mantle, whereas felsic forms from the melting and the solidification of sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks being things like your sandstones and your basically those kinds of things. It melts it. You got a lot of quartz in there. You got a lot of glassy materials in there and stuff. And so it was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. Okay, here's this section of the rock. It's definitely formed with earthly conditions and stuff. Right. This should have been an indication that something was wrong, but they concluded that it was a Earth meteorite. Oh, the astronauts, they just accidentally sampled a meteorite.
We're sending meteorites.
Very convenient.
Wasn't one of them petrified wood? They found that one of the rocks was actually
that was an example of that was back in 2009, and I actually questioned Aldrin about this. In my when I met him at the Australian Geographic Awards ceremony. This was some of the rocks they were giving out to the dignitaries, the world leaders all over the place. And I had actually asked him at the time, when you're in possession of this rock, were you aware that this was petrified wood, or were you also led to believe that it was a genuine moon rock? You see, I like to take I'm not like Bart Sabrell, where I get really hostile and things get heated up and everything like that. He has a very abrasive style of interviewing and stuff. I prefer to take the diplomatic approach. I like the diplomatic approach and stuff, and so
which I respect highly.
Yes, you can look at the video of me when I questioned him, and Aldrin, he seemed very, very anxious when I was asking him the question. You could see him start to, oh dear, he was sort of trembling on the inside. I could tell, and his answer was, oh, maybe somebody switched it and substituted. Somebody took the real thing and replaced it with petrified wood. That was his explanation for the thing. Recently, the typical excuse they give is that, oh, this isn't the rock that they gave them, it was a misidentification thing. But I think the better example, I think, is the Apollo 14 rock that was confirmed to have been from the moon. This is documented as this is a sample number. It's got all this paperwork that goes with it and stuff. There's no question that this is from the Apollo 14, and now they've confirmed that it is indeed from the Earth. And well, I'll actually give you an example from my geology days when I was doing my BSc in geology. Okay, we had a lecture about meteorites from the other planets, and they say the geologists, I'll never forget this. He mentioned we have meteorites from the moon, we've got meteorites from Mars, we've got one meteorite from Mercury. We don't have any meteorites from Venus, and why is that? It can't be because because it's so close to the sun, because Mercury is closer to the sun, and obviously we have at least one meteorite from there, so the gravity doesn't enter into that. Obviously they've been able to escape the sun's gravity and reach the Earth. It can't be because it has a a very, very dense atmosphere. Venus does, because the pressures that you get from meteorite collisions greatly outweigh atmospheric pressure, even on Venus. And so the only option left is, because Venus is comparable in size to the Earth. They often call it the Earth's sister planet, you know, and well, obviously, if it's comparable in size to Earth, it has similar gravity to the Earth. And so that's why we don't have meteorites from Venus. Right? If it takes something like a Saturn V to or takes a rocket rather to lift anything off the ground and, you know, send it out off into space. Okay, it's going to take a rocket to lift something off Venus, you know, to get it into space and reach the Earth. And so, you know, find a meteorite from Venus, and we'll consider that possibility. But that's the way it is. You see, they have been citing. They found evidence that this is from the Earth, and they want to claim that it's a meteorite from the Earth. Right? And
I mean, that's fascinating. Wasn't von Braun and his team, his Apollo team, down in the Antarctic, like just around the time that Apollo 1 was incinerated? And, you know, the Antarctic is a region that you will find meteorites supposedly from the moon. That's been mooted as well. It's not really great evidence. And also, I think those meteorites were supposedly supposed to be tracked within a nanosecond of their existence from the day that they left NASA, and so many have gone missing, evidently.
Yes, they do. There's the samples that were given away to scientists, one of which turns out to be petrified wood. They argue against that, and obviously there's a huge back and forth about that. But then you've even got examples of meteorites being either stolen, because you see the way that works is to get the meteorites, you have to write up this peer-reviewed paper or proposal rather, explaining, okay, here I'll need a sample of this. Here's what I want to do with it. Here's what I hope to learn from it. You basically get that peer review, then you send it off to NASA. They say either yes or no. They say yes, they give you the sample. They send it to you in the mail. And of course, you've got to send it back, of course. If you only really get to keep it if you destroy it in the process. You know, there are destructive ways of analyzing things like mass spectrometers and the like. And so, yeah, so some of it's been destroyed in the process of the studies. Others have been stolen en route. In fact, the one example that stands out in my mind, this was at the Goddard Space Flight Center, and some interns actually, you know, came around after hours, loaded a van up full of the samples, and they just drove off with it. You know, they got some of them back, I believe, but that's just astounding how that would have been allowed to happen.
That is amazing. Now, I guess the whole notion in here is, well, there are two very salient points about the moon rocks and about the radiation. Where in the hell did they then go about filming this? I can't believe that Kubrick was behind this. I've looked at Jay Webner's research, and I think it's a flight of fancy. It's quite romanticistic about the Scotch-Brite screen that was used with the front projection there for 2001. We've spoken to people that have spent time at Lookout Mountain Labs, and there was word there from an owner of that lab once it was decommissioned that he did find what looked like a set or a lunar landscape in there as well. But how do you go about filming this? Now, I know Bart Sabrella's recently released the book Moon Man, in which there is a confession. What do you have any weight to that confession and that story? And where do you postulate something like this could have been constructed?
Well, you'd better start reading what Sabrella to say about that. He explains in more detail in his book about that. In regards to, I prefer not to talk about or theorize where it was filmed and stuff, because I prefer to film how it was filmed. You see, the way this would be done, this actually became a whole kettle of fish a few years back. Some guy posted a video claiming that the slow motion technology didn't exist back in those days. I did a counter video showing that it did, right? And the way I believe it was done is they were suspended by wires, suspend the astronauts by wires, play it back in slow motion, play it back at about 60. When I did I actually took Adam Savage's wire jump video of him, you know, the only one they showed in full was the jump salute video. I took that video, played it back in 67% speed, because you see they didn't do it properly. You see, they shut them on wires on fill speed. Then they took the wire off and they filmed them running around the place at normal speed. Sorry, they filmed that in slow motion rather. They filmed the wire in normal speed. They filmed the slow motion without the wire. They never tried it both. They never tried it together. So I took the wire footage and I slowed it down to 67% speed, played it alongside the Apollo 16 footage. And what do we have? We have a near perfect synchronization of John Young and Adam Savage jumping. It's flawless. It's near synchronous, you know. And so there's been a documentary called I think it's American Moon, where they found that the frame.
It's an Italian doco, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an Italian documentary. It's a very good documentary, actually.
So we've got that.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make is that they found that the frame rate, the speed varies. The playback speed varies from different shots. One shot they might use 67% speed. One shot they might use something else. I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but basically, there's this sort of a row back in around 2012. Is that some guy, as I said, released a video claiming that the slow motion technology didn't exist. I countered that, and I've got a whole article about this. The two ways he first regarding Apollo 11, he argued that they only had magnetic disc recorders, which can only hold about 30 seconds of footage, and he argues, oh well, that's much longer than the moonwalk itself. I said, you don't need to store the whole thing on that disc recorder. Here's the idea: if you've got the whole thing recorded on videotape, feed 30 seconds of footage into the disc recorder, play that back in slow motion, record it onto a master tape, do the same thing over the next 30 seconds, the next 30 seconds after that, and eventually you got the whole thing converted into slow motion. In fact, the guy in question, he actually did a follow-up video acknowledging that as possible. In fact, I believe his words was, I think we have to promote faking Apollo 11 from impossible to not bloody likely. That's progress, right? That's what he said. I got a whole article on all this about that. He doubled down on his claim that for the later missions we would need high-speed video cameras. But here's the ironic thing: he actually mentioned a camera called the Videologic Instar, which was a broadcast quality slow motion camera that could record up to an hour of slow motion. You could do it in variable frame rate. The maximum frame rate was 120 frames per second. It could do 60 frames per second. It could do all these different frame rates, and you play it back in slow motion, right? He argued, oh, it's only in black and white. I found a book written by an engineering handbook, right? It had actually a section in there written by a fellow by the name of Chan, who actually worked at the Videologic Corporation. And in that he specifically states that this very camera from 1970, right, it could do high speed broadcast quality slow mo in both black and white and color. So his entire argument there was mute. Right.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we have to take into consideration is how that signal got to us. And I think the first time that the mainstream Australia was aware of that was the film The Dish, because it came through Honeysuckle Creek, ended up in Parkes. But we're also looking at many times of this signal being converted. And in that conversion process, anything can occur, can't it?
Yeah, the conversion process that they would have been talking about would have been the slow scan to fast scan conversion. What that means is that the camera, they said it only recorded at 10 frames per second, and to convert that into NTSC, which is 30 frames per second, they simply pointed a TV camera at a screen displaying the feed and basically broadcast that to the world. And the claim that it was 10 frames per second is in itself a disputed fact, because I looked at the frame rate and it seemed to be playing back at about closer to 24 frames per second, not 10 frames per second as they claim, because you could see the frame that was much more smoother in the motion, which is your
usual projection rate at that time.
If it was 10 frames per second, it would be very, very choppy, like look at my hand, right? Whereas it was much more smoother in the way it was moving. But anyways, as for how they would make it look like the films were coming from the moon, as I said before, the Soviets, they actually demonstrated how to fake a mission to the moon such that radio operators would be fooled. On the Zond program, they had a stripped down Soyuz spacecraft, which they would send around the moon and then back to the Earth again. On Zonda 5, they actually took a jumper lead, connected the transmitter and the receiver together. And so this was done for training purposes, telecommunication purposes. And what happened was that the cosmonauts, Pavel Popovich, Vitaly Sevastyanov, and there was another one, I forget his name off the top of my head right now, but basically they're all in this command center in Crimea, right? When the spacecraft was on its flight around the moon, they basically started radioing their voices to the spacecraft, which in turn repeated them. Right. In fact, Popovich actually made some jokes like, "Oh, where the flight is proceeding according to normal, we're approaching the surface," talking as if he's making an attempt to land. And the CIA on the receiving end, they all thought that this mission was for real. They in fact, Frank Borman, the astronaut, he actually received a phone call from the president, basically asking, "Why is Popovich on the moon?" You can't make this up. This is, in fact, when Borman actually came to the USSR in 1969, he was actually, there on some sort of a diplomatic, public improved relations sort of thing, right? He was greeted at the airport by Popovich, and this is quite a thing to say, because this is the guy, the commander of Apollo 8. Right? He's the one to talk. He goes straight up to Popovich and he says, "Hey, you space hooligan."
God.
I was just going to say the point is that the determinants they demonstrate this is how you would make the signals appear to be coming from the moon. And as I said earlier, the Indian space probe revealed that there is a surveyor spacecraft at the Apollo 11 site. So what I believe they would have done is they would have had to send a probe to the moon with the surveyor lander in tow, right? It would land on the moon. It would be broadcasting this. The astronauts themselves, they would be in Earth orbit, transmitting their voices to the spacecraft on its way to the moon, which in turn would repeat it, make the signals look as though they are coming from the moon when in fact the guys are in Earth orbit. And so that's why people like us, they like to ask, "Oh, were Honeysuckle Creek part of the conspiracy? Was Parkes part?" Well, they were the NASA misfit anyway, so I don't know why you're acting as if they're independent. But the fact of the matter is, obviously, they wouldn't have needed to be involved in the conspiracy if they could have been duped. Much the same way the CIA was duped with Zone 5.
Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that on one of the, I was looking at, all these reasons why the moon hoaxes are not real. And I saw on the BBC site, they had 5 reasons why the moon hoaxes aren't real. Was that they didn't have the technology to film.
To fake it.
To fake filming it, but they had the technology to send them there. Today, we have the technology to fake it, but we don't have the technology to send them there. Do you know what I mean? It's just like it makes no sense.
Some of the best analysis in 1963 has occurred here in Australia decades later on the Zapruder film. And it shows now that there is incredible re-imaging in that film.
Oh, yeah.
And all of us
Big
forget
tampering.
what they were doing optically with films like Mary Poppins
Oh,
at
yeah,
that
yeah,
time.
that came out of it.
And if they're doing that in the public domain, what are they doing behind the scenes?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's still highly plausible that we need to question what authority is doing. Is there money to be made from these contracts? I mean, William Casing called this the $30 billion swindle. And my background and my wife's background is in therapy. I worked with a lot of people that were homeless, that were street people. I drove Mission Beat there for a while. I think it's an obscenity to spend that much money when you have so much internal problems with being able to do healthcare and accommodation and sort out your impoverished, that in the 60s that we decide to throw all this money at literally the first time that African Americans get to vote correctly in the US. You send 3 white guys off to another planet to lay claim on it.
To trash it.
So
Trash it.
in that way, I think it needs to
We
be
should try to
questioned.
solve the problem. Go ahead.
No, go on, please.
I was just going to say, there is an argument to say that they should try to solve the problems here on Earth before they try to recolonize another planet.
Well,
that makes perfect sense, Jarrah. It really does.
It does, because if we haven't got our own house in order, how are we going to go out anywhere? And anyway,
And I mean, Shatner made a great statement recently. No matter what you think of William Shatner, and he's got no scientific register there,
At
of course,
all.
it was in Star Trek, but he made this incredible statement going, what are we doing? The moon may be fair enough, but there's no way we're going to get thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people
No
to
one.
Mars.
No.
It's an absolute impossibility.
Yeah.
And why aren't we cleaning up our own backyard? It just doesn't make sense at all. If your neighbor's suffering, you don't run in the opposite direction to shine your car.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
You knock on that door and you support that person because they're part of your community. But look, it has been an incredible thing and privilege to actually have you here. And I think Jarrah's research really does need to be taken an extremely good look at.
Mhm.
People balk at this subject way too easily. The one thing that I'm really impressed with is that there were people that came before, like Bill Kaysing, who wrote this groundbreaking book. Can you clear up for us now? Was this book, even though I don't consider that, oh, there you go,
There you
see,
go.
that's much better
You
than
got
what
it.
we've got.
Yeah.
And that's an original, is that an original printing of it? Is that
Yeah,
one of
this
the
is
first
this is
printings
yeah,
of it?
this is the 1981 edition of the book, and yeah, he wrote two
Wow.
editions. He wrote one in 1974 and one in 1981. The 81 edition is the much more detailed one, much more polished
Mhm.
and everything. And so, yeah, your question was?
And what people don't realise is that this wasn't just any Joe Blow. I
No.
mean, this man was working
What
at
was-
Rocketdyne.
yeah, he had
mightn't have had
credentials.
scientific
Well,
qualifications,
well.
but he eventually started writing papers on the plausibility of going to the moon.
I'm not sure if you can see my camera here and stuff, but he actually has one of his letters basically saying that he worked as a service engineer, service analyst, during his time at Rocketdyne. His goal was basically he would witness all these tests. He would here's all the data that the scientists have provided and stuff, and he would basically, break this down and present it into something that the government officials could understand, to explain like here's all the progress updates of what's happening. And during his time at Rocketdyne, there was something called the Apollo Simulation Project, which was basically considerations by the Defense Intelligence Agency and by all these different parties, how would we go about simulating flights to the moon as if they are reality. And he knew about all these things. He knew about all the problems that was going on with the F1 engine. He had witnessed all these various explosions of the N1. The F1. N1 was the Soviet rocket, and the F1 was the engines that they had on the Saturn V. They had the J2 engines as well, which was used on the upper stages. He witnessed the development of those engines that coincided with his career, and in fact, just towards the end of his career, they even had a program called Project First, which was to try to rectify all these problems with the combustion and stability problems. That's basically, as the name suggests, there's an imbalance inside the
Oscillation.
engine, which causes the rocket to destroy itself.
Keep going.
And so they did this test just towards the end of his career called Project First, and even at the end of it, von Braun, he had to build these engines on the hope that they would work. There was no real, guarantee that these things had been solved. They're just, okay, now it's slightly more reliable, but how much longer, And so Kaysing, he left in about 19, I think it's got it on the back of his thing.
He actually opted out, didn't he? He became. I've got a few of his little books on living in America for like a dollar a day. He was an astounding independent writer, and I think he made a statement there at one stage. He was on a houseboat. Correct me if I'm wrong. Not as learned as you are, and I didn't have that relationship. But he was on a houseboat. He was looking after children that have returned from Vietnam, and I say children, very young troops that actually ended up with lots of drug problems, and a few of them had committed suicide, and a father or a brother had come to him and made this statement and said, what can we do to expose this hypocrisy? And he goes, maybe I should write a book about the fact they faked the moon landing. Is that correct, or am I wrong there in that statement?
Just to clarify you on one thing, I did not know Kaysing personally. I knew his daughter and stuff, but he died shortly before I got in touch with him and stuff. But I knew Renee, I know David Percy, I know Bart Sabell, I know all the other fellows. But anyways, when it comes to Kaysing, right, he was the kind of guy who would bring homeless people off and take them back to his.
He was a stunning human being.
Yes,
that's the Amazon ripped off cover, is it?
Yeah, here's the official version.
Let's
look at the original.
Yeah.
Now they can purchase. Where can they purchase this original from you? Because you own the copyright. Amazon do not. So where can they purchase that?
You can get it from ralphrene.com. It's
Ralph Rene.
Yes. Now, as for Kaysing, right, as I said, he was the kind of guy who would bring homeless people back to his house and offer them free accommodation and food and shelter and whatnot. And as he said, he invited a lot of Vietnam veterans. And as I said before, Kaysing he was aware of all these problems, aware of all these ulterior motives that they were considering with the Apollo simulation project, and for the longest time, he just put it out the back of his mind. He just tried to, ignore it. He even went so far as believing what he saw on TV was true, even though, there was all these things that was obviously evidence to the contrary. But anyways, he was having a conversation with one Vietnam veteran who had developed a heroin habit. His name was John Grant, and Grant basically said, I was conned into going to Vietnam, kill a lot of innocent women and children and their families, and I was conned into believing what I did was patriotic, but that's bullshit. I can't say shit on this program, right? And basically, he said, what we need to get back at what the U.S. government has done. We need to expose this rotten and corrupt government. And he said to Casey, why don't you say, he was speaking about doing a satirical project, mind you. He said, why don't you say something outrageous like we never went to the moon? And so that's how that came about. During his writing of the book,
was Bill Casey the first person to actually start saying that they didn't go to the moon?
Well, he was the first person to write a book.
Write a book? Was he the first person to write a book about
rumors and barroom chats here and there before the moon mission take place? In fact, I remember my mother, she was about 9 years old at the time and stuff. She and her brothers, they remember rumors about a Coke bottle. It was actually mentioned in David Percy's documentary, but there were rumors at the time that there was a Coke bottle.
That's Uniromal.
We'll actually show that at the end, and I'm really excited to hear that your mother has heard about those rumors. She's actually younger than us.
No,
How
she's
shocking.
my age. She's my age. Yeah.
That could be our son there. Now, just tell me, Jarrah, did Casing's book and what originally was like, I don't think you could literally call it a book because it was like articles slapped together, the first edition of it. I'm sure the second edition is much more like a book. Was that literally lifted for the script for Capricorn 1?
He actually tried to take legal action against the producers of Capricorn 1 because they lifted a lot of his of what he wrote about. You see, what he had believed back then was that the astronauts, they had gone up the gantry, but then they came back down the gantry and they remained on the Earth this whole time. And this is probably still applicable to some of the later flights because he actually got a phone call while he was on a radio show. He actually got a phone call from a pilot who reported he was flying from a flight from New York to Tokyo, or was it the other way around? I can't remember. But basically, he was flying this plane, and he witnessed the Apollo 15 command module being dropped out the back of a C-5A transport plane. And so there's still something about that. But anyways, when it came to Capricorn 1,
it's telling,
basically the basic idea. And because they changed the destination to Mars,
Yeah.
Now,
that is fascinating.
He tried to sue them for that, and I don't remember how far that went or anything like that. But he actually has a section about it in his book. And let me see if I can find it.
Because we're thinking we're James Brolin in the cast.
Yeah, James Brolin was there.
O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
And who was our other actor?
Telly Savalas.
That's right.
He played the crop duster pilot.
Yeah, the crop duster guy. Yeah. Elliot Gould. So Elliot Gould and James Brolin both were married to Barbara Streisand.
Well, yes. That's a conspiracy in itself. Listen to me.
James Brolin's still married to her.
Yeah, I think something's suspect because you know how bankrupt Hollywood is.
Well,
Are they too afraid to make a remake? Let's just have a look at this.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Paul Cunningham, Capricorn Control. At the present time, all systems are go, all lights are green. The crew is now in the gantry access arm where they're preparing to enter the spacecraft. We're at T-minus 30 minutes and counting, and this is Capricorn Control.
Well, gentlemen, let's go to Mars.
Crew, would you and your men please follow me?
Are you nuts?
I said there's no time to explain. This is an emergency. Please follow me. Now!
78, yeah.
Oh, that is a great modern rework trailer for that film. Why didn't William Casey get the money he deserved?
That's a great
He writes
movie.
about this here about Capricorn 1 here. He says, Capricorn 1, which was based on the initial edition of this book, reveal how the motion picture aspects of the hoax were handled. They basically, pretty much borrowed a lot of stuff he had in there, about how it was filmed. And one thing that obviously is that he got wrong, of course, is that he reckons that they would have filmed it live and it's portrayed as being filmed in live. It would have made more sense to have filmed it in advance. Sabrell had that in his book about how it was filmed at this, I think it was Cannon Air Force Base, where they filmed it several months in advance of the landing, the alleged landing.
Mm-hmm.
It would make sense to do that anyway. I was just going to say, it would make sense to film that anyway, because you got to record it and play back in slow-mo and everything.
Absolutely.
Of course, it would make sense. Do you like the Rammstein song "We're All Living in America"? Have you seen the clip for that? Do you know the band Rammstein? I love that clip. It's so beautiful. We cannot really thank you enough. I'm sitting here. I've got a lot of other stuff loaded up, but I'm not going to go to it, Jarrah, because we've had too much of your valuable time. I believe you are a really important person, and this culture is very fortunate to have you. I hate the fact that you've had to duck and weave yourself through people out there who are much less qualified than you and throw so much shade and hate around. That's just the nature of going on the internet. One thing, I think we should end with Uninormal from the David Percy film, because that's always fascinated me. We're film and cultural historians, basically. We live in a warehouse just packed full of film. And at one stage, the Goethe Institute here in Sydney decided to throw their film archives out onto the street.
They did.
Someone had given me a genuine CIA flak jacket. So I put that jacket on. I spent 48 hours up there going, and I've actually got original footage from the Russian space program. And I think one day I'd love to sit down with you and go through that, because there's moments there where I'm seeing astronauts that are supposedly sitting in the capsule, yet the shot is literally meters in front of them. And so I'm thinking, were they doing fraudulent things with their space program as well? But what I do want to ask you as an astrophysicist, just very quickly, what is your assessment on what's happening in the world of UFOs? And how about this? Nearly a year later, what's this thing with time and dates with these people? This happens
Breaking
again.
news, U.S. fighter jets scrambled in the skies over the U.S. after reports of a high-altitude balloon flying over the western United States. Tonight, a U.S. official now confirming that NORAD aircraft intercepted the balloon some 40,000 feet over Utah. The balloon described as about 50 feet tall, carrying a small payload about 2 feet square. The incident, of course, coming
I mean, since when have so many air balloons become like the target of Sidewinder missiles? What do you think about recently NASA's revelations and the UFO subject itself in just a short couple of lines?
Well, I haven't really, the short couple of lines would be, I haven't really paid much attention to the whole UFO sort of thing, but I think the whole thing with the spy balloons, there was an argument to be made that the weather balloon, the Chinese balloon, was, believed to be a spy drone of sorts. And well, everybody's been really up the ante, with surveillance as of late. You asked about the Russian space program. As a matter of fact, I actually have an original copy of Lloyd Mallin's book. This was a science. What was it called? The Science and Mechanics special print. He had published a book basically arguing that various footage from the spacewalk, the Alexei Leonov spacewalk, was a hoax. Like in the example of Leonov, with the sun reflected in his visor, you can see the sun seems to be made up of 3 separate bulbs, not just in the visor but also on the metal of his spacesuit. And he argued that a lot of the Soviet stuff was a hoax or exaggerated. And in history has shown that a lot of it has been exaggerated, in which they were known to sweep a lot of things under the rug. If something, their modus operandi was very different to NASA. NASA, they launched a spacecraft in full view of the world, whereas the Russians, it was always behind closed doors. They was out in the middle of nowhere in Kazakhstan somewhere. They wouldn't even acknowledge they'd even done anything until it was considered successful enough to gloat about, for propaganda purposes and stuff. In fact, you can actually look up missions to the moon unmanned missions and stuff. Even though they may be listed as Lunar 1, Lunar 2, Lunar 3, whatever and stuff, that's not necessarily their chronological order. There was many other probes, before and between them that were wondering whether they didn't reach orbit or they failed or whatever, and they got swept under the rug and only got revealed until the fall of the Soviet Union. Regarding this whole spacewalk hoax, there's an interesting thing is that Jim Oberg, one of the pro-NASA guys, he actually published an article in response saying that Malin is basically right, that some of the footage has been faked there from, training sessions or simulations or this or that and stuff. Oh, but his spacewalk did indeed happen. They were just careless in, what footage they released and labeling this properly and stuff. Even today, I've even got a copy of Leonov's book. It even has one of the pictures, that it was proven to be faked, and it's captioned as if it was, as if it was genuine and stuff. There was, why would there be any carelessness in all this sort of stuff? There's a lot of question marks surrounding the Soviet space program as well. The big one, of course, the biggest Soviet cover-up, of course, was the Soviet moon program, which was they had the N1, which was basically their version of the Saturn V. They had like 30 engines in the first stage alone, and they had 4 tests of this thing, and each one turned into a disaster. When that failed, they swept that under the rug and basically claimed, "Oh, we were never trying to get to the moon to begin with." That was their line until the end of the Soviet Union. But just getting back to today's stuff, Elon Musk, he had promised back in 2012, he had basically promised a modern day equivalent of the Nova rocket, which was the gigantic Mars rocket that was proposed back in the 50s. What he delivered was a modern day equivalent of the N1, because that too has like 30 something engines in the first stage, and we've never had 2 tests of that so far, and you've seen how well that turned out to be.
I was watching George Powell's Conquest of Space yesterday. They've just put out a beautiful Blu-ray of it. And it's an astoundingly underrated film, but very scientifically inaccurate. But we're looking then at things like Willy Ley and von Braun. And von Braun back there in the mid-50s was saying to actually get the thrust to get to the moon, you would have needed something at least 10 to 20 times the size of the Saturn V. So it's quite interesting to see how quickly that science changed and what has occurred. What we might do here is just quickly go to this piece from David Percy's film about Una Ronald just before we wrap up. I've always loved the Una Ronald story. I went into the State Library. I tried to find this issue of the paper at the Times. Oddly enough, is it a coincidence? Is it a conspiracy? Is it the silencing? Those issues of that particular paper weren't there. So it sort of stopped me in my tracks from going any.
We'd like to offer the upholders of this status quo viewpoint yet another major challenge. In Western Australia, during the live telecast of Apollo 11 in 1969, many viewers in that region of Australia, including Una Ronald, were to have an extraordinary experience.
When this moon landing was in the offing, I for one decided to stay up to watch the live telecast, and I did, and we saw a lot of activity on the television screen from the control center, a lot of anticipation, a lot of excitement.
But before we get to what happens next, we need to know how the TV coverage of Apollo 11 was supposed to have reached our screens.
Just shortly before Armstrong stepped on the moon, you can actually see the switch take place where it goes from this stark black and white to a little better. And they stayed with the television signal from Honeysuckle Creek. So when Armstrong stepped on the surface of the moon, it actually came through Australia, but at the time it was reported as being through Goldstone. The voice came through Goldstone, but the TV pictures came from Australia.
It appears that correct information was apparently withheld at the time as to what was supposed to be happening with Apollo 11's reception.
But as I watched this person walking, a Coke bottle in the lower right quadrant of the screen, it seemed to be kicked over and rolled across. And for me, that was just astounding, and I exclaimed aloud at the time, it's a fake, it's a setup. They're not on the moon at all. Look at this, it's a Coke bottle. And they were going to broadcast the same film again in the morning, and I phoned several of my friends, did you watch? And they hadn't. But they were going to watch in the morning. And I waited, of course, to say, well, did you see it? But it didn't happen. I watched the second telecast. There was no Coke bottle, which led me to believe at the time that it must have been edited out. I was convinced it was fake, but why? Why it should be faked? Why such a setup? 2 or 3 others of my acquaintance did see it. Furthermore, there were letters written to the West Australian newspaper. They mentioned the Coke bottle. And I waited for it to brew up. I thought, my goodness, there's going to be a glorious ding-dong here going on about this Coke bottle. But suddenly there was nothing at all. And I presume that those who saw it denied their own senses, as people will do. Began to think, well, they couldn't have seen it, or perhaps it was there and that was okay. They'd thrown some rubbish out of the spacecraft or something like that. It could have been. People will invent all kinds of solutions to what is not explained.
What Una Ronald and her friends did not know was that Western Australia was a special case concerning the reception of the initial Apollo images. Contrary to the procedure for that continent set up by Honeysuckle Creek and Parkes, together with NASA and Australian TV, the Apollo 11 images were neither sent directly to Western Australia via satellite, nor was there a broadband link from Sydney in 1969. These images had to be sent over to Perth from Sydney by other means and then retransmitted locally. So for an engineer in the loop, aware of the hoaxed live TV coverage, there was motive for adding further additions to the scene. Moreover, here was an opportunity for someone in the know to manipulate the material before transmission across Western Australia. What does Una Ronald, who is...
Okay.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I love the way that all these all roads lead back to Australia. There's those moments where you just go
in that regard and everything, because just recently, as a matter of fact, they mentioned something about how the Coke bottle was apparently edited out of the video in the later releases. Well, I've recently just found evidence of more censorship. Well, I can't really take all the credit for it. There's a YouTuber by the name of Retro Freak. I think it was Retro Freak. What's his name? I've got it here somewhere. Here we go. Retro Freak 84. He found a reel of Apollo 11 footage. It was labeled Apollo 11. It actually was labeled Man on the Moon 1, so like a tape of many, which he got from eBay. He purchased it thinking it might be the lost footage. And you remember how they said they lost the original unfiltered videos and everything? He figured it might be one of those, but it turned out to just be a recording of NBC's broadcast. And he went through all the efforts of cleaning it, restoring it, and then digitizing it, and he's uploaded it to YouTube. You can find it there. And I was watching this footage, and I noticed something amiss during the bit when Aldrin is supposed to be, backing out of the lunar module. He announces he's going to close the hatch, right? And shortly after, we can hear the sound of a hinge, followed by the door shutting slightly. Right, and so that sent alarm bells ringing, because obviously in space, it's a vacuum. There's no air inside the spacecraft. There's no air outside and stuff. Sound can only travel through a medium.
You're not going to hear it.
And the microphones, NASA says the microphones have a very limited range. So the sound produced by a door closing is between 60 to 80 decibels. 60 decibels is about the noise that we're speaking in right now. 80 is about the range of a vacuum cleaner, and well, still, it would have to travel through his suit glove and up his arm into his helmet, right? And I looked at the later releases, the retouched version from 2009. When they digitally remastered all this footage, and even the earlier NASA releases before that, the sound of the door closing is gone. I wanted to make sure that this was indeed there originally. I checked CBS's broadcast. You can find that on YouTube as well. The audio in there is not as good, but you can just barely hear the sound of the door closing, around the time when it's supposed to. And so, yeah, it seems like obviously this sound of this door had to be in there originally, and they must have edited it out in the official later releases.
Wow. There you go.
What were they doing with that door with Apollo 1's crew that opened on the inside? But anyway, and Gus Grissom's family, if people have a problem with digesting a second of this information, go and look at what they had to say about the death of their father.
Here's the thing, the people that are looking into it from scientific, from a scientific stand, that this stuff doesn't make any sense. They never get, as much publicity as
they get shot down to pieces
all the time, and they get called kooks and whatnot. But look, you know what? If it doesn't matter if somebody has an opinion, let them have their opinion, and you can listen to it. And if you don't agree with it, you can say, okay, I don't agree with it, and just let it go.
3.7 million uploads to YouTube on a daily basis. You have got more than enough variety to choose from.
Yeah.
If something offends thee, don't pluck the eye out of it. Pluck your own eye out and go and watch it. But anyway, Jarrah, I am really, we feel, and I'm going to say this to you, we feel blessed and honored to have you on the program. I am so glad to make this connection with you. I thank you very much for all your detailed observations on Odie today and just talking us through this. I've got tons of stuff loaded up and I'm not going to be able to get to it. I would love for you to return at one stage and we map the course of this history of the moon landing. You know what? I think investigation. I'm beginning to want to dump the word conspiracy.
No, not conspiracy.
Because they put theory on it. They've devalued that word. Conspiracy is so ubiquitous in the law system. Why is it a problem in the public mainstream mind think? And that's because, that can be dated back to CIA circulars of those dissenters to the Warren Commission theory. But it's been an honor to meet with you, Jarrah. I've watched your site there, Moonfaker, and also know that there was something in there that I went, click, this guy is completely genuine.
I knew it.
There were little bits in there where in between all this marvelous research, you would do a piece dedicated to your family or your grandmother. I thought, this guy's got heart and soul. And that is the makings of an integrous person. So I need to pay attention to what this man says. There is a book that you are about to release. Let's just have a word of that. This book's maybe going to flame the whole of America. But anyway, let's have a look at this.
So,
yes, this is my novel Trojan Smirsh. Smirsh. My book actually became much more relevant in recent months, rather, because literally just weeks after this book was accepted for publication, right? Smirsh, you see, was a Soviet intelligence agency during the Red Army back in World War II. It's a combination of the words Smert Spionen, which translates to death to spies. Their job was snuffing out Nazi spies and Soviet defectors, during the Cold War, and so recently, after this book was accepted for publication, I learned that Putin had resurrected the Smirsh agency as part of his invasion of Ukraine. So when I first read this novel, the idea of Smirsh still existing in the 21st century was just that. It was an idea and stuff. I had no idea that that it was going to come back anytime soon. But anyways, this is the culmination of a pet project of mine that's been in the works for about 24 years. Because back in 2000, you mentioned my tribute videos to my friends, my family, and stuff. My step grandfather Gordon Mitchell, right? He spent most of his winter years laying in bed listening to the horse races and the dogs on the radio, rather. And back in 2000, I started typing up some chapters about this super spy of mine, Sid Tanner, right? And I read a few chapters to Gordon. He loved them, and I continued writing more and more. Eventually, I got a manuscript. He loved it so much, I ended up writing a sequel. And eventually, I got about 6 manuscripts. And so I was writing a 7th, and he died shortly after that. I was really devastated. And on the day he died, I promised to make the character Sid Tanner known all around the world. And so, on and off, I've been revisiting those old stories every now and then. I've been doing other things in here and there. So, like, I would continue a bit here, then something else would happen. I'd continue here, and something else would happen. I ended up, I was actually in the process of writing a backstory and a trilogy of. I submitted to George Lucas with this. You see, I was actually writing a backstory, sort of updating the characters. See, when I first wrote these stories, they were all set in the pre-9/11 world, but I updated it to a more contemporary setting. And while I was writing that thing, the January 6th insurrection happened, and there was all these talks of what could have happened, or how much worse it could have been, and stuff. And so from there, I got an idea of my own, and I wrote this alternate history thriller with Sid Tanner starring in it, and obviously, I can only give you so much information without spoilers and everything. So,
of course,
how do people find this book, and when is it released?
It's currently in the editing phase, and it'll be released through Aurora House. I'll get the website. Let me just post the link in the private chat. You might be able
What
to
I
share
might
that.
get you to do is, because this will go.
The link will be in the.
So if you send us that stuff, we
Yeah.
can link all that in the chat notes, and people can find that.
Yeah, if they're interested.
Is there some way that people can support your research, or is it just purchasing Ralph Renee's book? Is there some way if people want to financially support you, or mostly support you with information? What's the way that people best get in touch with you?
Well, the best contact address is jarrahw@gmail.com. And as you said, you can purchase the books. You can also send donations if you wish. I have a specific PayPal account for that at jwstudiosdonations@gmail.com. You can send donations to there if you wish to support me financially in researching. If you have anything specifically about space, about the moon landing hoax for me that you want me to purchase for research wise, there's a PayPal account, moonfaker@gmail.com. Is it Moonfaker Donations?
Right.
In a while. I think it's Moonfaker Donations. I'll send you. I'll put the correct link in there and stuff, and you can send that there. Yeah, it was Moonfaker
If you
Donations.
can send that to us.
Mm-hmm.
If you can send us any other links before late tonight, and we'll make sure they're in the show notes, and
way before
it will
tonight.
stream
Soon
tomorrow
as,
at midday.
soon as.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
we
so
just
Moonfaker
so
Donations
appreciate.
That's correct.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yes,
Yeah,
so
that's right.
for donations in general, it's JW Studios Donations @gmail.com, and specifically for Moonhoax donations, it's moonfakerdonations@gmail.com.
Okay.
Because I believe you're one of the only people in the world to actually take this subject very seriously and scientifically, so much so you went and got yourself qualified as an astrophysicist, and that you are a gentle, thinking, intelligent person. And there needs to be a counterpoint. Always with power comes corruption, and we need to question everything around us and take care of those around us. I think it's incredible that book is actually dedicated to your grandfather. That's just so special that you had that time to run through that with him. My grandfather was a poet, and I used to listen to so much poetry that he wrote. He wrote an incredible poem about me one day as well, Sydney Porter, but that's a whole other story. In the future, we'd love to get together with you and do a whole history to the alternate way of researching the moon landings. Jarrah White, you're an astounding person. We're lucky to have you as a local Australian. Let's get together for dinner one night. I think we've got a 16mm color copy of Footprints on the Moon, isn't it?
Yeah.
Footsteps on the Moon. Let's have a look at that and see if in that feature film that was released to the general public, there's not a bit of footage that NASA said is missing. You know,
we also have that Wernher von Braun story.
I Aim at the Stars. We've got that on 16mm. Wasn't that a sanitized version of a member of Hitler's elite SS? That really was.
Anyway, all right. Well, thanks everyone.
And is there anything you'd like to say in summing up here, Jarrah? Sorry, we talk so much these two of us.
Well, in summary about the moon landing hoax, all I can really say is that this is my own opinion, but I think it's 100% accurate as to why we're in the state now where they can't can have troubles just landing a probe on the moon, and I think in the long run it's going to get to the point where they keep delaying, and this is my own opinion, but I think it's 100% accurate. I think before we will even see any serious efforts into trying to put people on the moon, they'll wait until the last of the Apollo astronauts have died. Because, once they're all dead, they will be in a position where saying, okay, yeah, we come clean. We faked it. We were in a propaganda war with the Soviets. We needed to do it. Times have changed now. Let's try to, get this over and done with. Try to get to this. Try to get to the moon for real. Solve all these issues. I believe that's what's going to be happening in the long run. And I believe private space exploration will try to help us there in that regard. Not in the current state it is right now, as I said, Elon Musk, he promised us the Nova rocket. What he delivered was a modern day N1, which was a disaster. And so I think with some modifications, like instead of trying to send the upper stage to the moon and back, I think he would be better off dedicating the Starship to being a dedicated upper stage to launch a radiation shelter module in the living quarters. You can use the Dragon to dock with that, and presumably you would have to send up another rocket to to carry all the propellants, a dedicated upper stage to launch it out to the moon, out to Mars and stuff. I've done several videos on these lines as to how to solve the radiation hazard with the SpaceX technology. If Starship doesn't turn out, you might have to consider something like Blue Origin, perhaps. But the point is, and stuff, we got to try to solve these hazards before we can even think about getting humans there. And I believe that's what's going to be in the long run.
Totally agree with you. Blue Origin sounds like another energy provider we've been throwing thousands at here in Australia. The wife and I have an opinion on what should happen with Elon Musk. We want him to go straight to the largest ATM in the States and then knock door to door, handing out cash to people and apologizing for what an obscenity he is. How can you trust anyone who goes straight to Amber Heard after Johnny Depp? But anyway, whole other story there. My heart is with you, Jarrah.
I would like to say as well, though, and stuff, of course, I would also need an apology perhaps from, not specifically from Blue Origin, but from Jeff Bezos as well for allowing
there's
Renee's
that
book
too.
to be published illegally, the outdated copy to be published. He found it down at Amazon, and I've tried to get the legal copy removed, but they don't really listen. They say, "Oh, prove you have to purchase this book." You have to purchase this book, then prove that it was affected your. Well, I should have to purchase a copy of my own book just to prove that it was copyright infringed.
You own the copyright on that.
They don't care.
And that copyright was dedicated to you posthumously. That is an obscenity. They've done that with Paul Manning's book, Nazi in Exile, on the fact that Borman lived and went down to South America. It is horrific. Let's see what we can do. I'm out of campaign. Yes, we need that man to apologize as well as to the door knock. Okay, take good care. Have a great day and all the best to you, Jarrah. We truly appreciate you being on Untold Radio's Down South Anomalies. What an episode this was.
Absolutely.
Odysseus, 52 years later, and still we're tilting at the frigging moon.
Okay,
it's not just a
kids.
windmill, it's the moon.
All right, kids, we'll be back next week with another program. Who knows what it'll
Won't
be.
get better than this.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, bye.